and not a lot of time to fit them in, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Courtney Reich. I am the Coastal Director for the Georgia Conservancy. I am here to moderate the first panel, which is called Effective Community Engagement and Equitable Access to Resources and Funding. This is a subject that I'm very interested in hearing more about. Our organization, Georgia Conservancy, is working with communities throughout coastal Georgia on marsh protection and learning more about how to effectively engage the communities that really need this kind of assistance is near and dear to my heart. So with that said, I'm going to explain a little bit how the panel will function. We have two presentations, so they're partner presentations. So we have 4 panelists, and they'll do 2 presentations with 2 and 2. Our first presentation is going to be from Nick Deffley with the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network, and Dawud Shabaka with the Harambee House, Citizens for Environmental Justice. These 2 will give our first presentation, and then our second presentation will be given by Kait Morano with Coastal Equity and Resiliency Hub at Georgia Tech, and Jazz Watts with 100 Miles and Vulnerable Communities Initiative. So I will turn it over to you, Nick and Dawud. I guess, do you want to talk from here?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Right after lunch. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? No, I'm sorry. That's a bad thing to do. Is there a presentation that's going to come up? Oh, okay. Is there a...
Yep.
Got it. Hold on.
Everyone close your eyes.
It's a surprise. Great one. It should have Deffley in the name, Deffley. Well, that's all right. We'll just go. All right, good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Nick Deffley. I am my title's changed recently, so I'm the Federal Resources Director for the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network. And so I'm thrilled to be here with you all to talk with my friend and colleague Dawud Shabaka from Harambee House about a project we actually ran when I was still the Director of Sustainability at the City of Savannah. And so that project was called the Smart Sea Level Sensor Project. And it was actually a great partnership between many organizations, including Harambee House and the City of Savannah, but it included partners like Georgia Tech, NOAA, Chatham Emergency Management Agency, and many others of you, I'm sure, are in the room who were partners in this project, and that project continues. I will tell you a little bit about it, and I'm sorry that we don't have the pictures, but just use your mind's eye and kind of think through this as I try and paint the picture here real quick. Oh, well, look. There you are. Excellent. Thank you all. There we go. Cool. All right. So, project overview of the Smart Sea Level Sensor Project. Essentially, here was the issue and the challenge we had in Georgia. So, we know and knew that over 70% of the major flood events had occurred and are increasing, but they've occurred since 2015. So we know that sea level rise and intense storms are having a more dramatic impact on our coast. We knew that we had 100 miles of Georgia coast and only one NOAA tide gauge for that entire 100 miles. So that meant that the data that we had around how to respond more rapidly, how to plan more effectively, was really pretty narrow in scope. So we knew we needed more localized and real-time information about sea levels and the impact of storms compounded by sea level rise for our residents, for our planning, for our infrastructure, and for our overall resilience, especially when we start thinking about our most vulnerable communities right along the coast or along the Savannah River here in Savannah. But I will add that this project is well beyond just, at this point, Chatham County, and we are really working with partners throughout geographically along the eastern coast here in Georgia. But I'm not going to delve too much further into the partners, so those of you who have been involved in the project, just forgive me. I'm bypassing tons of really great information, and there is a website on here, sealevelsensors.org, that you can go to and get a lot more information on the project, and a lot more technical expertise. So from here, I really want to pivot to the partnership that Harambee House and City of Savannah had in coming into this project to work on community engagement and really focus on how we engage our residents in this work. And so, Dawud, I'm going to ask you to come on up here when you get a second, and I will just say we had a variety of different types of community engagement for this project, and we will start to get into those here just by showing a few photos. So you can see on the top left, and I'll talk about this just briefly, we did a lot of engagement with our youth in the school system, developing sea level rise curriculum and sea level curriculum. We also, with all these sensors that were deployed and developed through Georgia Tech partnership, one of the things I neglected to mention, they are a very low cost, high reliability sensor, the intention of which is to get them distributed all throughout the county in tidally influenced water bodies so that we really have a much more real-time idea of what's going on with our sea levels at any given time, is sea level rise compounding with intense winds or prevailing winds or hurricanes or storms coming in and having a more dramatic impact. And we get real-time information on that. And what that does is it helps us in, one, I think just better emergency response and planning for especially our most vulnerable communities. It also helps us think about our longer-term planning and infrastructure. So it's not just, well, when are we repaving that street, but why are we repaving that street, and at what level should we be repaving that street, and what is the broader infrastructure that's really included here around stormwater, where we are thinking about, someone mentioned zoning is broken, where are we thinking about where we build, how we build, all of those different things. So our hope in that project, and this is still coming to pass, is that the data gathered by those sensors is actually going to help inform our local governments and our local governing bodies and how we plan and be more resilient in the city of Savannah and certainly beyond that. So, given that, I just wanted to add, again, back to these pictures on the top there with the youth that are kind of working in this space. We had kids from some of the engineering academies helping build out some of the sensors. There is a community engagement component to that, involving the community, involving the residents, wherever they are. So from the schools to some of our more key environmental justice communities to others, that's what Dawud and I wanted to talk about further. So I just wanted to frame that up, and Dawud, I'm inviting you to come on up now and talk a little more.
Thank you, Nick, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Dawud Shabaka with Harambee House, Citizens for Environmental Justice. And the Harambee House was founded about 33 years ago by Dr. Mildred McLean. She saw a need here in Savannah, her native hometown, for a redress to issues that have plagued the city, but specifically the West Side communities all her life. These issues are a part of the legacy of the history of America, the systemic racism that has been a part of America, and the impact that it's had on communities of color and African American communities specifically. So she founded the Harambee House to deal with issues of pollution that range the gambit. And I could probably spend this whole afternoon just talking about that aspect of it, but I won't. I'll come back to what some of the current issues are. Nick talked about the Sea Level Sensor Project and the work and the impact that it's having on weather prediction and also the look and the assessment of sea level rise. For the communities on the west side of the city, this particular project helps to address one of the issues, one of the many issues that the west side deals with. That is flooding. Some people call it blue skies flooding, sunny sky, flooding, et cetera, et cetera. But every time it rains, there's massive flooding on the west side of the city. Well, it's been clear, and the discussions with community have shown that this project can help to predict where that flooding is and look at the infrastructure within the city to help assess where infrastructure improvements could happen. But the issues with the west side of the city are so massive because they deal with all aspects of environmental justice. We're talking about the lack of healthy food in the area, the soil and water contamination on the west side of the city, issues on transportation, lack of services on the west side of the city, and issues that impact communities that are near ports and near industrial areas. The particular design of the west side of the city has several of the communities surrounded by industrial companies that do work with the ports, as well as being close to the ports and being impacted by diesel trains and trucks that traverse the communities on a regular basis. So we're really looking at a plethora of different issues that are impacting this side of the city. How do we address those particular issues? And how we look at what can be done to begin to work on ameliorating, mitigating those issues is a highly compounded and complex set of concerns because they impact every aspect of life. How do we proceed in a situation like that? So the Harambee House, in partnership with some of the other neighborhood environmental justice communities, are looking at a wide array of projects and issues to begin to deal with these problems. And one of the first real major concerns that impacted me in my work with the Harambee House, which has been about 7 years, is the frustration and the lack of trust and confidence that these communities have with local government and with governmental agencies that over the decades have attempted and have proclaimed we have solutions, we have a process. But with the years and years of studies and workshops and whatever you want to call them, charrettes, that have been presented to these communities, what these communities come back with is the same response. Nothing changes. Nothing really improves the situation. We have increasing childhood asthma, we have increasing asthma, we have increasing diabetes, we have increasing cancer. And when I go to, when I go to the Department of Public Health to ask for specific information connected to zip code 31415, there is no response, or there is no really workable, practical information that I can come away with. So, for example, we have a community on the southwest side, Ogeechee. This community is about 110 years old, mostly African American. And on one side of their community, they have a cement company that received a permit there to operate in 1980, I believe. And they have been operating as a cement company, as a company that receives the cement and other mixtures to create cement blocks, doing indoor and outdoor operations, literally just on the other side of the railroad tracks from this community, blowing cement dust onto the community. On spring or summer days, you can go down Julia Drive, look on the front porches of the houses on that street, and you see the cement dust. Their question is, how could a company that does this type of work, outside as well as inside, but operate in such a way, blowing silica dust onto their community day after day for 30 and 40 years? Wouldn't that area have to be zoned for commercial activity? It's not. It's a residential area. Turns out the law in the state of Georgia says that if you operate as a cement company and you produce less than 120,000 tons of silica dust per year, you can operate, and operate in a residential area. So for the past 20 years, they've been working on, well, how do we get this company to change its operations or move out of the area? And they are looking at legal action once again. That's just one example. So when we look at, in the 21st century now, when we look at communities that have been dealing with situations like that since the 50s, if not earlier, we begin to say, well, what kind of change has happened? What type of advances have come along in the social consciousness that would still allow this type of activity to happen in a community? And when you talk with these communities in Hudson Hill, Woodville, Ogeechee, Tremont Park, they come back with the same response that I heard when I was growing up in the 60s. Well, we're a black community, so this is how we're treated. I would like to believe that we have advanced far enough along in our social awareness and our connection with one another that that type of thinking and that type of response to that question would not be the answer. But that hasn't happened yet. So now today we have the Biden administration. And I've been impressed with a number of the legislations that have come along in the area of environmental justice and funding under the rhubarb of Justice 40. These are promising. But the issue that we see at the Harambee House is that these communities that need this help don't have the time or the wherewithal to do the research necessary to find the $3 billion that's spread across 40 plus agencies in the federal government to zero in on, well, we want food scarcity grant money. Do I go to the EPA or do I go to the U.S. Department of Agriculture? Or maybe do I go to NOAA, to NOAA? They don't know. So the Harambee House has established, last year we established what we're calling the Southeast Regional Environmental Justice Network. We're looking at the EPA's Region 4, the 8 states that make up the Region 4, and we're looking to find representatives from those 8 states to come together under a steering committee to look at a draft we developed, a 62-page draft, on over the next 10 years, these are the major environmental justice issues that need to be dealt with. Each state has its own issues, but in the field of environmental justice, there are some basic things that always happen. We always know that 70-75% of all communities around ports are going to be non-white, poor communities. We know the same percentage exists around industrial sites. So how can we begin to address those issues? What are those issues? And how can we look at coordinating efforts across those 8 states to begin to deal with those issues and related issues, and also have a common area of concern. And one of our key directives will be to look at these 40+ agencies, find out where this IRA and IIJA money is, and begin to say, okay, this money is here. These particular communities have issues in food scarcity or transportation or lack of medical service, or they need data collection, et cetera, and begin to coordinate efforts to get that money to selected communities. I know I've kind of rambled on and on because I tend to kind of, this is key for me, and it's a disappointing issue of environmental justice in the federal government and how aid is provided to the people who need it. But it's also encouraging that there are possibilities out there. So instead of rambling on anymore, I'll leave it at that, and thank you.
Thank you. I knew there wouldn't be enough time for this panel. There's so much to talk about and so much to hear about, and unfortunately, we only have a short period of time. The next presentation is going to be given by Kait Morano with the Coastal Equity and Resilience Hub at Georgia Tech, and Jazz Watts with 100 Miles and Vulnerable Communities Initiative. If we do run out of time at the end of this panel, then we'll just take questions, I think, at the end of maybe both panels. We'll see how it goes. All right.
I will say that I asked Dawud explicitly to sing my praises when he was up here in front of the entire group, and I think he forgot to do that, so I forgive you for that. Hi, everyone. Kait Morano. I am the Resilience Planning Director for the Coastal Equity and Resilience Hub and a research scientist at Georgia Tech, and Jazz Watts is here with me. I'll let him introduce himself when he comes up here after me. But did I just press that button? Sure, okay, great. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about our project, but first I wanted to show you this graphic. I love this graphic. There are a couple different versions of this. One has like a bicycle, but I like this one. And I think it does a really good job of showing people what we mean when we're talking about equity. Equity is not equality. We're not talking about giving communities, giving people the same resources, right? We're talking about giving communities the resources that they need to achieve the same outcome, right? So we are really targeting what we're doing, the work that we're doing, to communities that need help, that need resources, that need technical assistance. And that sort of underpins this project called the Coastal Equity and Resilience Hub, or CEAR Hub. And this is a project that came out of, it's sort of the next iteration of the Smart Sea Level Sensors project that Nick and Dawud mentioned. And the way that we think about this is we have these 3 project pillars. The first project pillar is the environmental sensor network and the decision support tools that we build based on that sensor network. Russ Clark is going to be, hi Russ, Russ is going to be at a table tomorrow morning in the Data Tools and Technology exhibition with some sensors. These are low-cost sensors that we have put out into the community that measure water levels in real time. We have also bought and put out some purple air quality sensors. The second pillar is our community support and engagement work. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then the third pillar is K-12 education and workforce development, which I know Nick also mentioned a little bit of the work that we've done with local high schools here. That's a high school student assembling one of our sensors. We've also used the data from the sensors to build a middle school curriculum, which is really cool. And that's available also at sealevelsensors.org. They learn about like plotting and mean, median, mode. It's very neat. So some of the work that we're doing in the sort of community engagement and planning and support sphere, I want to highlight in particular the work that we're doing in Pinpoint, Georgia. Russ is laughing. I'm sure it's the photo that's down there. The work that we're doing in Pinpoint, Georgia, which is a small Gullah Geechee community here in Chatham County, just outside of Savannah. And we have worked with the Pinpoint Betterment Association, which is a neighborhood group, on resilience projects. We have really made a concerted effort about bringing community members, bringing community groups to the table at the start of the project and engaging them as true partners in this work. We have really been intentional about the way that we are going about this work. We try to not focus on vulnerabilities. Communities know what their vulnerabilities are, what their challenges are. They don't need someone like me to tell them that information. We tried to do asset-based work. What are the strengths in your community that we can build on? Communities like the West Side communities that Dawud was talking about have such strong social cohesion and social network, and we know that that's important in doing resilience, disaster-related work. We can use that asset and build on that to build resilience more broadly. In Pinpoint, the Pinpoint Betterment Association has set up an ad hoc committee of 7, I believe, community members who are sort of guiding our work in the community. They have decided, we have funding set aside for the community of Pinpoint, and the ad hoc committee is deciding how that money gets spent. These committee members are paid for their time, which is key. We're not asking people to continuously show up and volunteer their time. Their time is valuable, their knowledge is valuable, and they should be paid like the rest of us are paid to be here and do this work. So that's really exciting. That is ongoing work. We just recently had a meeting. They have decided to spend some of the funding to trim trees. So they went out and got quotes and tagged a bunch of trees within the community that they would like to take down that are threatening property, that are threatening vehicles, and that's the first of the resilience-related projects that they have chosen to do. But I'm really excited to see we've sort of started about a year ago holding community meetings, and it was a small number of people at first, and it has continued to grow. We've continued to get more and more involvement, and I think once people see that actual work is being done, these projects are being implemented, I think we're going to continue to see more engagement. I'm very excited about it. I'm going to skip this real quick because Jazz is going to talk about this, but I wanted to end with this slide of some of the lessons that I have learned and or am continuously learning doing this kind of work. Jazz, I added your face real big on the, you probably can't see it, but Jazz wasn't there for the picture, so I wanted to just, I want to make sure Jazz is there. But it's important. I think if a lot of us in the room are probably like me, I like, key takeaways. I like slides like this. It's important to build trust early and often and continuously build trust. The kind of sort of community engaged, bottom up work that we're doing moves at the speed of relationships, right? And you can't do this work and really engage the communities that I think most of us want to help if there is not trust and if those relationships are not strong. So it's key to build that trust. We also work to acknowledge different kinds of expertise. I think a lot of us in this room have the scientific expertise, but we may not have that local wisdom. And valuing that local knowledge, that traditional knowledge, that cultural competency that we were talking about earlier, equally with scientific knowledge is really, really important. I think it's important to plan for community engagement. I think a lot of people, certainly I, did not learn how to do community engagement when I did my graduate program. It sort of was taught as you collect the data, you make the plan, and then you show the community. You do community engagement on the back end, and that is not the way that this work really needs to be done. We need to be planning for engagement. We need to be doing it early. Often, these community members need to be at the table, and for me, it's less of a, you can sit with us at this table, and more a come sit with us. Be intentional about reaching out and engaging and involving folks in this work. So that is all I have. Jazz, I'm gonna turn it over to you real quick. I threw some photos of Brunswick up there.
Thank you. I didn't see that picture, but I'm Jazz Watts. I'm a descendant of both Sapelo Island and St. Simon's Island. So I tell people I've seen the best and the worst of things. I think I echo everything that everyone has said here. When I think about environmental justice, the first thing I think about is my cousin Ahmaud Arbery, who was, of course, lynched February 23rd, 2020. It will be 4 years. There's an article that was by Nisha Powell. It said the home of Ahmaud Arbery has an environmental racism problem. So all of a sudden, all these eyes were on Brunswick, Georgia, where 25% of the Superfund sites are sitting, where people are living next to these plants and these industries that keep coming back again and again and again. But, they can't be there unless they're failures by agencies like the EPA, EPD, the local governments, the state governments, all of these officials. We have to hold everyone accountable so that people aren't living through this legacy of contamination. When I'm, up here, I think about the balance of power. What are you doing with the power and the space that you occupy with the power that you have? When we're talking about this, we're talking about something that we have been talking about again and again and again and again. The problem is policy. It's not working for people. People shouldn't have to be living in these spaces and as they are. The conversation about trust, that is so important. Think about the work that you're doing in the space that you're in, and are you really, really listening to people and listening to communities? Are you really working alongside them, or are you doing your work that just happens to include them until you get the results that you want, right? So we have to make sure that we're actually doing the work, and that is difficult. That means that you might hear some things that you might not want to hear. You might, get your feelings hurt, but imagine coming from a community living in these spaces and having to deal with this frustration and then seeing somebody else come along again, and you're the next person in the next agency, and here we go again. Let's see if these people will follow through, if they're really going to do the work, if they're really going to be helpful. I'm also a part of Brunswick Health Study, looking at the sites where 100 participants, the people that are really impacted volunteered and gave their blood to look at some of the toxins that they're surrounded by, that the people are living in. In 2015, there was another study done with residents from Sapelo, same toxins, high elevation. And the question is why are we still doing the same things over again and again and again? But generations of the same people are being impacted. I think that we have to think about when we are working with communities, all of these things. If you're working with communities and you're coming from an institution, are you fighting to get indirect costs down so that you can get more funding actually into the communities with the people that are directly being impacted? And are we truly doing engagement? And what does that look like? I found just, working in these spaces that sometimes engagement is giving the least amount of time, because people just assume, well, people are already dealing with this, they're already in trouble, they're gonna need us. Well, sometimes that's part of the problem. Sometimes people or agencies are doing the work to get to their ends instead of actually doing the work to actually change things, which is difficult. That means that you may have to address and stand up to the policymakers that you may even have personal relationships with, right? But what is going to be more important in the end? And we have to be able to separate those relationships from the business of caring for people, of caring about communities, of actually having progress. And that can be extremely difficult. And even in Brunswick now, almost 4 years later after that, those sites are still there. I mean, there's cleanup happening, but the process is still slow. Communities are still dealing with, all of these environmental injustices, constant flooding, contamination, and all these things. Those problems, are still there. I feel like there are a lot of good people that are in this room, and part of the problem is maybe there's just not enough good people that are pushing for the right policies, that are making sure people understand that there can be no compromise when it comes to the lives of people, when it comes to communities. We have to do everything that we can with the power that we have to impact this change. Or what happens is that year after year after year, we're continuing to have, this same conversation. And the last thing that I want to acknowledge is Nia Burnett and Monet Murphy, who are Sea Grant Fellows. They didn't know that I was gonna say their names, but having, good support through fellowships and making sure that they're paid, just like you should make sure that community members that are a part of studies, that are a part of the work that you do, have some level of compensation, because, the people that are living in these spaces, they don't have, the benefit of having a salary, right? So it is their time. But if anybody's got it tough, it's those folks. So we got to make sure that we're going out of our way and doing everything that we can to usher in that change. And I didn't get a chance to talk about Sapelo much or talk about the zoning, but I think you've seen all that. And again, it goes back to policy. What are we going to do to make sure that while we're doing this work, we're also pushing, for policy changes and helping, people that are in communities, to hold those officials accountable. All right, thank you. My time's up.
I'm looking to the folks that are coordinating. Did you want to take questions, or do we want to move to the 210 panel? We need to. All right, I want to thank our panelists again for a wonderful talk. And hopefully we can maybe take questions generally after the second panel, perhaps. So thank you again.